Frank Hyder is a well-known, renowned visual artist. When he started to become an artist, he thought the journey would be a straightforward progression. Over the years, he has discovered that the road has many twists and turns, numerous hills and valleys, and countless challenges. Through this series of short stories, tales, and remembrances, his hope is that these will offer some valuable insight into the life of an artist and what's involved in becoming an artist. In the end, he has come to realize that he is not a painter or sculptor or anything in particular. He is more simply a creative person with great passion and love for the process of making art concerning people and the world around us, who shares his artworks with the public. Join us now as we listen to another episode of A Life in Art series.
Today, an art college encourages its students to get into the art market and to get involved in the art business. And unfortunately, most of that is something that art schools know very little about. In my career as a working artist, I've known all kinds of art dealers. Usually, the art dealers are very, very full of themselves in the sense that they believe that their idea of what art is the right idea of art, and they look for artists that support their point of view. And so that just gets to be an accepted point of view, and it doesn't necessarily blend all that smoothly with what art school teachers tell you you're going to expect to find when you go out into the art world. Well, anyway, about 8 or 9 years ago, I obviously had plenty of art dealer experience and plenty of shows, and I was invited to be a member of an exhibition that would represent the history of graduates from the Maryland Institute College of Art, including many very notable people. And I was informed that there would be a curator who would be picking the work, and that the show was going to take place in New York City in the gallery of Ethan Cohen in Chelsea in New York. Now, the Chelsea neighborhood right now in New York is really the center of the art world. There are galleries virtually on every single street and in almost every building, and sometimes as many as 6 to 10 floors of galleries, one on top of each other. And anyone who's in that neighborhood is very seriously involved in the arts. It's a place where people go every day just to see art with no expectations of buying it, mostly with hopes of learning from it. Well, anyway, the curator who for this show was in Baltimore, and I met with him and talked with him, and he told me what they were interested in my work, and I committed that to him that I wanted to make something specific for the show. And I had this idea about a painting that I wanted to make. I was concerned about, I was living in Florida, just had been recently moved there, a couple of years I was living there, and there had been this young man by the name of Trayvon Martin who had been killed by someone who was a vigilante who was supposedly patrolling a neighborhood looking for trouble, and he saw this kid coming home from a gas station where he bought a candy bar, and there was a confrontation, and the kid ended up being shot and died. And so it was became a national problem because there was a lot of emotion on all sides of the issue. Gun control, the kid was black, the guy who killed him was white, etc. There were lots of issues there. And so I had this idea that I wanted to make a painting using a technique that I had pioneered, where I would make a flat painting on a 3/4 inch panel of birch, and then I would carve it out, and then I would take the carved pieces away and paint it again, and then nail the carved pieces back on, not to reassemble it, but rather to rearrange it, and then paint it some more. And it gave a rather three-dimensional, powerful image. And what I also wanted to do was emphasize this idea that this kid, even though it was a human being, that for some people, when they looked at this kid, they saw like almost like a threatening creature, and for other people, they saw something different. So I tried to get that balance of feeling in the piece, but the piece was very, very strong. It painted in bold color, and it had these real intense eyes. And anyway, that was the piece. And so the curator told me that it was going to be on a certain wall. He showed me a map of the gallery, and he said it's going to be hung over here. And then I had a smaller piece, which he liked, a wood carved self-portrait, and he liked that, so that was going to be included. And then I was told that after this show went up, there was going to be another show in New York State where Ethan Cohen venue. So I didn't know who this Ethan Cohen guy was and what was his relationship to this college. But when I went to New York with my painting of Trayvon Martin, and I stepped into the gallery, I met Ethan for the first time. And as soon as he saw my painting, he said, no, that's not going over where you put it. That's going over here. And he put it right in the center of the room, at the first thing you could see when you stepped into the space. And the curator said, well, I want it over here. And Ethan turned and he said, well, it's not going to be over there. This is where it's going to be. And I said, well, I'd like this place. It's a good place. I'm happy with whatever you say. So anyway, we put the work together. The show went up, and it was a great show. There was lots of really good quality work, and it was Ethan's gallery was a big gallery. He had 2 floors, and there was 18 artists in the group, and it really was a real strong show, and I was proud to be part of it. And then we were getting ready for the next part, which was going to take place up in Beacon, New York, which is on the Hudson. It's only about an hour and a half away from New York City. And as I said, I really didn't know anything about it, but I did look into it, and I realized that the Dia Foundation, which used to be housed in Soho in New York, was now located in Beacon, and they had a rather big museum, contemporary museum space there. I also discovered that Pete Seeger, the folk singer, lived in Beacon, and when I went up to Beacon for the first time to look at the building where the works were going to go, I had this idea that I wanted to make these paintings that would cover windows in the big exhibition space and sort of transform the windows into a kind of like a stained glass thing, but not exactly. But light would go through the painting, and I thought it would be rather dramatic. So anyway, and then the curator told me he liked these inflatables that I was making, and wanted me to bring those as well. So anyway, I was in the gallery in New York again, and Ethan's assistant, who was a Chinese woman who had worked at Goldman Sachs previously to working for Ethan, said to me, she said, Ethan's interested in you as an artist. He's spent a lot of time on your website, and he's interested in you. And I said, no, I didn't know he's interested, but it's good to hear, because I'm always interested to know that someone in New York is interested in my work. So anyway, the time came to go up to Beacon and install the pieces. My pieces, I had painted 7 paintings that were all 7 feet wide and 12.5 feet tall. And they were painted on Mylar, which is a heavy kind of plastic that the Disney cartoon films were painted on. It does something magical when light goes through it. It becomes almost luminous. So I had deliberately chosen the Mylar and made these big panels, and then I had a strip of wood across the top where there were hooks attached to the strip of wood that would go through wire that could go up to the ceiling and hold the pieces in place. So I had this all set to go. I had my inflatables, and I get up there, and there's all these artists working. There was a huge building. Ethan had acquired an entire high school, a 1915 built high school, 3-story brick building, full-size school with I don't know how many classrooms, but at least 100. And it had a big full gymnasium, an auditorium, a big library, etc. It was really a great building. And so he had acquired this and was just getting started. He had given it the name Kube, and it was going to be, at that time, he was calling it the Kube Kunsthall, and Kunst in German means art hall. So anyway, I went into this big gymnasium where I was going to hang my pieces, and the only ladder they had was a Home Depot 20-foot extension ladder, and the ceiling was 30 feet high. So the only way you could get up there to hang the work was you pull the bleachers out for the basketball court, and you put the ladder on the top step of the bleachers, and then you climb up, and even with that, the ladder just reached the ceiling. So 3 times I started up, and 3 times I was personally just, it was too scary, and I backed down. I came down. I had to reorganize my thoughts and get my courage up. And so I went back up, and I got all the way up. I'm holding the roll of the one painting under my one arm, and I'm holding onto the ladder with the other. Then I kind of wrap my arm around the ladder and push up to dislodge the ceiling tile so I can slide the rope on the end of the piece over the grid, drop it down, tie a knot, let the piece hang, come back down the ladder, move the ladder over 4 feet, and go back up and catch the other piece and bring it up and do the same thing again. So I had to do that for each of these paintings. Well, I noticed that there wasn't a single, when I had started, the room was filled with people installing work and setting things up. I noticed there wasn't a single person in the room. Everybody left. And I said to the curator, I said, what happened to everybody? He said, nobody could stand to be in the room. It was the scariest thing we had ever seen. Everybody got out of there because they were certain you were going to fall, and nobody wanted to be involved in that. So anyway, we got all the pieces up. And then Ethan had me put this inflatable right in the middle of the gymnasium, and then he had me put these 2 inflatables outside. And I could tell by the way he was paying attention to what I was doing that he was pretty interested in these inflatables. And as I said in another one of these talks, that when I started making the inflatables, there was a clear division. There were a lot of people who thought, nah, this inflatable thing, this is not really a good thing. This is something that belongs in a parade. It doesn't belong in an art show or in an art museum or an art gallery. And then there were other people who, like me, saw the enormous potential in these things, because I really do, and I still do, see all the potential they had. But at this point, all the pieces I was making were about 25 to 30 feet tall, and every last one of them, when I had them made and I got them back, I had surprises that the only way I could solve and make them work successfully as a sculpture was using paint to disguise the things that I was not happy with. Anyway, they were still very, very effective, and when we had the opening, they clearly got an awful lot of attention. And at a certain point, Ethan Cohen walks over to me and puts his arm around me and takes me aside, and he started asking me questions. Now, as I said, as I started talking here, I had no idea who Ethan Cohen was. But at this point, I did have a little idea who he was. I knew that he was actually very famous in New York for being the very first gallery in New York City to show contemporary Chinese art. And I had learned from that day at that opening, where I was talking to Ethan Cohen's father, I had learned that Ethan had been raised in Hong Kong, And so he could speak Chinese as well as speak English, and he spoke French. And that his father was an international lawyer who was a specialist in Chinese business relations, that his mother was a PhD in art history and a photographer. And so Ethan had been raised in this environment, and after high school in Hong Kong, he went to Harvard, where he studied Eastern Studies. And after his graduation from Harvard, he came to New York, and he opened his first art gallery in New York City, and he began showing Chinese artists, contemporary Chinese artists, before any gallery, any museum, any exhibition space in New York thought of it. He was doing it. And one of the first artists he was showing is now one of the world's most famous artists, whose name is Ai Weiwei. And so anyway, I had a kind of an appreciation for Ethan as an art dealer of consequence, somebody who had access to real collectors. And as I talked with him, he asked me questions that led me to think in new ways about what I was doing. And I really couldn't answer some of his questions. Like, he wanted to know, could I control the production of these pieces and make them in series so that I could make 3 or 4 in an edition and they would all be virtually identical, which is required when you're making sculpture. You need to be able to make editions. So anyway, I couldn't do that, and I knew that I needed to figure out how to do that. So I left the show in Beacon, and I went back to Miami, and I did a lot of research, and eventually I found an Iranian guy who operated a company called Inflatable Concepts, and I went to see him, and he showed me that he could actually help me answer the questions that I could not answer for Ethan that day. So he and I worked together, and we agreed, and he made me an inflatable there according to his specifications, and we worked out the idea. He wanted to know what I wanted to be able to do with it, and I told him it was very important to me that they be portable so that I could use them and set them up in unusual places. So anyway, we went through all of this. He made the first piece. I went down after he called me and told me it was ready, and I was really very happy because the piece really did, for the first time, look just like the drawings that we made to make it, and I was pleased. So I made a second one, and the second piece, I went to New York, and I took it with me to New York, and I stopped into Ethan's gallery, and I stepped into his space, and I inflated the piece and showed it to him, and he liked it a lot, and he said, look, how about you let me take that up to our space in Beacon, and we'll use it and put it in different events and shows that we do. So I agreed to let him do that, and then months passed, and eventually I produced the first of my Janus inflatables, and the Janus project began. And I must have sent Ethan a slide or a email with a picture of one of those, and then I got a letter from him telling me they were curating an exhibition on Faces that would be an international show with artists from Africa and China and other places, and he wanted to be part of that show. So I brought my inflatable to New York from Miami, and when we got to the gallery, it was a 10-foot piece, and it was so big that it was confrontational to the show. And, my experience with art dealers is that anything that interrupts the flow of the show will damage sales, so they really don't want to do it. But in this particular case, Ethan says to me, no, he said, look, how open-minded can you be? And I said, Ethan, I'll be as open-minded as possible. I want to be in the show, and that means you figure out how to get me in the show. So anyway, working with me, he came up with an idea that they actually put the inflatable in the courtyard outside of the gallery, with half of it coming through the door into the room, which you could do with an inflatable. And it was inflated, and it stayed that way for 2 months. And actually, in all the installations that I've ever done with the inflatables, it still remains one of the best ones I ever did. And it really indicated that he was really kind of very, very, very savvy, very smart about how to install work. So anyway, I saw Ethan periodically. I would see him at art fairs. He would come to Miami during Art Basel. I'd stop by. I'd share pictures of what I was doing, but still nothing really concrete had materialized. And so I just said, look, I'm going to stay in touch and let that go from there. And so then about 2 months ago, I was in Miami and I went to Art Palm Beach, and I had just started making Janus figures in cement. And what was really exciting about the Janus sculptures in cement was that when they were cast and out of the molds, they looked like they were 1,000 years old, and yet they were very contemporary. And I realized that I had sort of gotten to another place where the work had another identity that I really enjoyed. And I shared a photograph of it with Ethan, and his first comment was, that would be great in front of my building in Beacon. And I said, yeah, it would be great. And but nothing really firm had come from it. So we talked around the idea a little bit, and I wished him well, and I left. And then I thought about it, and then about a month and a half later, I went back to New York, and there I went back to Palm Beach, and there was another art fair, and I saw Ethan again. And he was, again, just delighted to see me and very talkative. And I showed him a picture on my phone of a brand new cement piece that I was working on. And he looked at it and he said, I really like that. And he said, wouldn't this be really good in front of the Beacon? And I said, yeah, it would be. So how do we make that happen? So we proceeded to begin discussing. We sat down, and for about an hour, he made little sketches of where he thought he might like to have it, and he wrote down all the specifics of its size, and we talked about a time frame, and we came up with a rough sketch of when we could do this and if we could do this. And again, I left a little bit more secure, but still not certain of what was going to happen. Then over the next few days, we communicated by email and text, and finally, Ethan and I came to an agreement. He agreed, because I really didn't want to just give him the piece, even though I could make the donation and take it off as a tax write-off or whatever. I just felt that there really had to be some commitment on his part. So we went round and round, and finally we agreed on him paying me a price, and that he agreed that he was going to represent me with this work in Beacon. And he said, I'm going to do a show of the Janus project during the month of July, which is there's a weekend where it's New York State art weekend, and I'm going to feature your work for that weekend in Beacon. And I was delighted with that. And then lastly, he said, and there's one more thing. There's a magazine, Chronomag magazine, that's doing an article on him and what he's doing in the Hudson Valley in creating exhibitions. And so he said, I'm going to give you a plug in that article, and hopefully we'll get a picture for the magazine. So when I went up to install the piece, besides being warm and really, really generous, Ethan followed just as he promised. He had the photographer there from the magazine take my picture. He talked up to the town's person in charge of art in the town for special events about the fact that we were doing this show in July, and she suggested, well, we're doing another event in November. Could we do something then? And Ethan says, of course. So anyway, in the conversations, I walked away from that knowing one more time that, Ethan had offered me an opportunity. I took the risk and followed up on the opportunity. And each case, I learned more about myself and what I was trying to do. And I didn't necessarily just make money, but what I was really doing was he was helping, like a great coach, make me a better artist, make me more effective. And to quote Michael Lewis, even great athletes need coaches. So why is it so ridiculous that an art dealer could not be a coach? I wish that was true, that more of them were. Most of them are telling you what they want you to make so that it's something they can sell. That wasn't my experience with Ethan Cohen, and that's one of the reasons why Forbes magazine calls Ethan Cohen one of the most influential art dealers in the world. He's not showy. He's not generous. He's sincere. He invites the artists and people around him. He enjoys being with people. He asks interesting questions. He likes to laugh. He likes to take people by their hand, smile, and get their response to things. Anyway, I say that there's many ways to look at an art dealer, and there are all kinds of art dealers. So I think the idea that an art school can teach you how to deal with an art dealer is really pretty absurd, because they're as individual as every other human being is.
Thank you for listening. If you have questions or suggestions for future episodes, please reach out to Frank Heider on Facebook or Instagram. We hope to see you at one of the next A Life in Art episodes.